Hello, today I'm continuing painting the area around Thurleston. This is Burgh Island that's been in no end of films, and Agatha Christie books were inspired by the hotel on the island. And friends and I think there's about 4 or 5 of us, we all walked all the way around the island. But you can get a sea tractor out or walk, depending on the state of the tide. But it's a lovely Art Deco hotel. So I'm just putting on some manganese blue for a change. And now I'm going to get some stronger paint, exactly the same colour, make it more concentrated and just drop it in certain places. Because the hotel is white, so that'll be a good contrast with the sky. I'm going to take some down to the hillside, but not all of it. So I've just cleaned the brush and dried it, so I'm more in control. Just leave a few areas that could be cloud showing. Now the sand here isn't pale white sand. In parts of Devon you get quite a red sand. So I've mixed 2 or 3 colours together. A couple of browns, which were raw umber and burnt sienna, and a little bit of Naples yellow and Azilian crimson, just to get a darker colour, but it still looks summery. Now that's run out now, so I'm changing to just Naples yellow and Azilian crimson, just to ring the changes. Don't necessarily want a big expanse of beach to be the same colour all over. And there's little pools of water, rock pools. And I'm putting this on with a size 8 brush because there's a lot of sand. And then it's quite dark in the middle where there's still a little stream of water. So I'm just going to put a couple of darker lines in and then mix some more Naples yellow and Azilian crimson to make a biscuit colour. Put a little bit of blue in this time just to subdue it, and go to the other side. Just put some in, change to a smaller brush and just pick up the Naples yellow and then drop it into it. So I've got quite a lot of variation of the sand, and go round the rocks. And just add more interest to have a few different shades. I'll just lap it up to the rocks the best I can, and then it disappears just about there. I just want to make it a little bit lighter, so I'm adding just Naples yellow, and that will send the paint back. There's a higher bit of sand there, so while I've still got the same colour, I'm just going to put the sand in. I did an oil sketch. Sometimes an oil can lead to a watercolour or the other way around. So while that's drying, I can look at the hillside, which has got an awful lot of rock as well as grass. So I'm making up a rich green, adding a little bit of yellow ochre to give it harmony with the sand. Changing to a smaller brush again because it is some distance away and goes into point. So I'm going to start on the left here. Just move it gently to the edge of the cliff. I don't know how long it took us to walk around because we were chatting, but it's just a nice place for a stroll. I'm going to put the same green on and then tint it. So I'm going to go to the other side of this chimney, which is a reasonable mark. Just put a little bit in. And then more at the top, it's a very hostile environment for plants. And then there's some lawn at the front of the hotel, which I can gently put in, and some at the front of the house here. So over here it looks as though it's just barely hanging on to the rock. So I'm going to mix up some brown and a little bit French ultramarine and just drop in a wavy line. And it looks like it could have some heather on it or something. So just adding a little bit of crimson every now and again. Then I'm going to go back in with the green mixed with the brown mixture I've just made. Wet into wet, but it'll just give the suggestion of a more exposed hillside with not so much growing on it. The next thing I'm going to do is put some roofs in. Not the hotel, but there's about 5 or 6 other roofs that I can see. And if I put them in, then it's easy to map things off against them. Now, because I'm going to use homemade grey in the rocks, I'm going to use grey from my palette. So I'm going to start with a Payne's grey and just put in the first building I can see easily with a chimney. So I'm just doing a diagonal line and another one and another one, and then just get them to meet up. Can always adjust it later, but I've made a start. And then there's a lighter one next to it, so I'll still carry on with the Payne's grey, but I'm going to add some Naples yellow, or we could add yellow ochre, and just put that one in. Just very gently. And that's got a little roof coming off sideways. So I'll just stick in sort of a bar of shape with a point on the end. And then there's a more prominent building here next to the hotel that seems to be grey, but it's got natural growth on it. So I'm going to go in with the Payne's grey, and I can always tint it afterwards. And again, that's just a rectangle with sloping sides, but it's got a dormer window in the middle. So I need to do a grey triangle for now. It's also got a chimney, but I can stick that on later. So I'm stopping at that point, just leaving the triangle there. And then coming down on the left, there's another building that's got a slightly darker roof. So I'm just going to pick up some more Payne's grey. And that is a lozenge shape again, but going the other direction. And it's just under where the rock meets the cliff. So that's why it's always useful to have something to measure off against. And the top of it is level with some grass, which I haven't put in yet. So I'll put the roof in. And then there's a boathouse or something next to it. So I'll just put a little shape in and lose the edges of it. While I'm there, I'll put the grass in. Now, there's a building right underneath the hotel that's got a very light roof. So I'll go back to the Payne's grey and the Naples yellow for that. So I'm just going to put in a line. And again, that's got a little dormer and it's sort of slightly staggered into the hillside, so I'm just going to use the sand colour to put the front in. And it's got a couple of windows, so I'll just put the uprights in and not worry about anything else for the moment. And then I've got a white wall, so the answer with that is to put the green in, and that is underneath the tree. So if I put the green in, and I know that there's something going on there, and I've got a slipway for going up, which I'm going to put in Naples yellow because it goes away from the sand colour, so it's actually in line with there. And I've got other little areas that have got little marks I need just to put in, just to add a bit of variety. So now I can mix up some blue with the sand colour to make your homemade grey for the hillside, and then I've got continuity of colour, because the sand would be sort of crumbled local rock. All the sediments go down to the sea, so I'm going to put that in with just upright marks for now, just to show it's rock, and then go back in with some yellow ochre added to the mix. Start the other way at the bottom and just lip up. It is a long way off, so I'm just starting very tentatively just to claim the space. I will put another coat of paint on that. Moving down, there's quite an exposed area here that's looking quite bright, so I'm going to add stronger yellow ochre to that. I think it's catching the sun. And there seems to be some sort of wall or walkway there. It's probably a sea defence. And the rest of the rocks in the light I had look quite pinky, so just dropping in some pink, not everywhere. And then slightly more yellowy down the bottom, so mixing in more yellow ochre with the grey I made. Doing the same thing, just going across, just making little marks. Now I'm going to return to the top area and drop the yellowy mixture between the pinky ones. And in reverse down the bottom, pink going in at the bottom. That's given a good start for the cliffs. The cliffs on this island have got vertical lines in them, so I'm just putting in a darker brown, which I've made with burnt sienna, French ultramarine and some yellow ochre, and just putting in some dark lines. And then to separate them from each other, I'm going to drop in some yellow, which has a chemical effect of acting like opposite magnets and just separating things. Just brighten it up a little bit. And then there's a tiny bit of grass on top, so I'm going to use some sap green and a little bit of yellow just to warm it up a little bit. And there's grass right on the ridge, but I'm not going to put that in now, going in beneath it first, just to set the tone. A little bit more yellow, and there's an area where it goes closer to the rock and comes down again. It's not a straight line. Just bring it forward to the white building. Now the white building doesn't want to have the same colour of grass all the way around it. To make it stand out more, it needs a few different shades. So I'll just put those in wet, let them drift off. And it'll just give a better impression of the building. And then coming down the other side, there's a big tree, so I'll put that in next. So I'm going to make a very dark colour out of Viridian and Payne's grey. I'll just put in the big tree, but putting all the leaves and branches, putting it all out in the way it's formed. And there's another one that in as well. A couple of darker branches. It's got quite a distinctive top line, so I'll just put that in. And then building with a dark front all helps to change the tones to the next stage of slightly darker ones. The way that the lights will look impressive is to have darks nearby. So with a white building as a centre part, need a few dark areas nearby. And the trees start to give that impression. And now I can do the rocks on the beach to add a few more darks. And again, they're a warm brown with vertical markings. So I'm just going to put in vertical strokes going along the shape of the rock. Then I'll go back in and add some darker areas and highlights. So I'm just going to add some yellow ochre and go in from the bottom. And then there's some areas that the sun's catching and they're very light, so I need to separate them a little bit more. So I'm just going to go in with a clean brush and just lift a little bit of paint every now and again. And then just wiggle the edges so they're a little bit indistinct. And the same on the top. A wiggle goes a long way in a painting. And I've got a few light areas, I'm just going to lose those. Now that's got to dry, but the rock in front is much darker, so I'm going to go in with indigo and burnt sienna. First of all, claiming the shape of the rock as it's smaller and nearer. And then going up and down. And it's got another one nearby, so just put in a smear there and then up and down strokes for it. I'm going to go in with some richer brown, so I'm just adding some Indian red, but you could use Venetian red. If you haven't got that, just add some ordinary red to a brown just to warm it up. Don't have to go and buy every paint in the paint shop. And the same with this one, just separates it from the sand a little bit. Now to get some contrast, I'm going to add the sea. And then that will help me choose the shade of the greens more carefully. And a few people brave enough to bathe or walk on the edge. I'm just going to drop a little bit of turquoise in on top of that, just to show that the water changes colour where it's slightly shallower. It's not too light because of the brown sand. In Devon there is a lot of brown sand, and you have to look at the tones carefully. And I've got the same with the puddle in the foreground. A little bit of turquoise just to warm it up, and then the only way I can make it lighter with the brown sand is to dilute the paint. A few little areas of reflection there, so I'll just put those in and then add the rocks afterwards. Around the rocks. And then more diluted paint coming forward. Then I've got reflections that aren't blue at all, so I'm going to leave that area for the moment and come back with darker colours. A little bit of turquoise again, just to show a tiny bit of reflection. I don't want that to be too dominant because it's leading you in. Now the reflections on the right, there's sand in front of the rock, and then there's reflections of the rock which has got seaweed on, so it starts off with quite a bit of green. So rather than lose the space, I'm going to put green in first. And then match the reflection to it. If you've got two colours in a rock, always put the lighter one in first if it's something like seaweed. Just lose the edges a little bit. Now I'm going to go in with from the top with a really dark brown, so more burnt sienna and indigo. Just go around the line of it. And I'll pull it back from the line I've made. Hopefully the water's dried off a little bit by now. I've given it a minute. Get some water and just pull it back. Doesn't matter if there's other colours on the brush. It'll all add to the rock formation. And then go back in with a little bit darker and just put in some darker streaks. And then just with the burnt sienna. And it's just mixing it on the page that's giving the variation. Now I've given the brown a moment to dry, and I'm going to go back in with the very bright green for the wet seaweed. So I'm mixing chrome yellow and lemon yellow, and then just a little bit of sap green. I'm just going to drop it in, wet into wet. All the seaweed is clinging to it. That introduces a little bit of colour to the front of the picture. I've got to let it dry before I do the reflections, otherwise they'll all merge. To finish off the picture, I'm just looking for detail, so I'm just putting in the little hut on top of this building. Just make a few little marks. And then the windows on the hotel. They're all very pale, but there's shadows, so I'm going to go for the shadows. So I'm making a greeny grey to match the roof. This building has got quite dynamic windows, so what I need to do, as the building is white, is to select the horizontal or the vertical and try and put the windows in pairs so that there's some harmony between them, and then go back again and highlight any shadows or any other features that are dominant. But you just need to make your mark and work out the spacing. In other areas, it's sometimes easier to put the shadows in because they're more dominant than the feature itself. That if a building's lost in the hillside, the shadow will be more distinct. I'm now returning to the hillside and warming it up a little bit on the right with some yellow ochre and putting a few dark bushes on just to give it slightly more shape and form. And I'm revisiting the area around the hotel, trying to find anything I can that can be tinted and highlighted, because that will make the white building look brighter. Now the windows have had a chance to dry on the hotel, I'm going back and just highlighting any shadows or features just to make the image stronger. Put some people on the beach, but they're very distant. So I'm going to just put in heads to start with. I normally put shoulders in first, but at this distance I'm going to do heads. And then just a simple colour to show up against the sand. And then some darker bottoms. Clean a brush off and pull those down to legs. I've also warmed up the very foreground, where there's a puddle, and just made it slightly warmer nearer the bottom of the page than it is where it meets the sand. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this video.